we are now very lucky that we still have a tiny bit of time together. One of the things that I've seen at some conferences and that I've always really liked is when we have a moment of reflection at the end of the conference. And we are so honored that Anja Nygren, one of the founding members of the EXALT initiative and also one of the track chairs, so I'm sure a lot of you have had the pleasure to interact with her over the last 3 days. She has been willing to take on the role of kind of closing the conference for us by reflecting on the work that we've done together in the last 3 days. So she is going to do that for us. I'm so sorry. It's the end of 3 days. I think I'm getting a little bit zooey in my head too. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to yield the floor to Anja for her to give us our conference closing.
Good afternoon for everyone. It is my pleasure to shortly summarize the wonderful presentations and conversations we have had in this EXALT 2021 conference. First of all, I want to thank you all and everyone. It has been really exciting and inspiring 3 days. We have been together discussing multiple aspects of global extractivisms and alternatives. Thank you all the keynote speakers, all the paper presenters and artistic performers, all the conference organizers, all the panel session chairs and coordinators, all the discussants, all the technical assistants, all the listeners, and all those who have raised interesting questions. I think the biggest thanks goes to Sofia Hagelani-Albo for tremendous amount of work and energy she has put in organizing this conference. So my sincere thanks to Sofia. Many thanks also for my colleague Barry Gills for launching this wonderful initiative of extractivisms and alternatives for several years ago. I just want to mention a few general ideas that came up in different sessions and discussions during this conference. Then I will shortly summarize the discussions in different tracks and thereafter. Of those general ideas, the first one, global extractivisms and transformative alternatives have complex dialogical relationships. We need to understand more profoundly their cross-scale interlinkages. There were important discussions related to definition of extractivisms and alternatives in this conference. Here I refer especially to excellent keynote presentations that we had. This concerns especially the concepts of ecocide, genocide, the changes from slow violence to raw violence, our role as defenders or scholar activists, the concepts of environmental racism, indigenous sovereignty, and multi-species justice. I'm sure all these discussions will have much influence in our future works. It has become clear that we need more analysis of different sectors of extractivism and of their contextual differences, but also careful intersectoral analysis. For example, how changes in fossil fuel extractivism related to plans for agrofuel and biofuel plantations, or of wind and solar power. Especially when examining the commodity networks related to different types of extractivism, it is clear that strict categorizations between the global north and global south are highly problematic. We need to amplify our attention to cross-scale analysis instead of strict area studies focus or a nation-state focus. The financial, logistical, and production consumption networks of extractivism are global, and their environmental social effects are often planetary. It is important to understand the historical changes and continuities in different forms of extractivism, as well as in social mobilizations and in the search for alternative production consumption networks and new regimes of governance. I just now want to summarize the discussions in different tracks that were the ideas that were sent to me by different track chairs. In track 1, we focused on the political economy, political ecology, and world ecologies of extractivism. We discussed diverse yet closely interconnected topics, including energy, agrarian and forestry extractivisms, mining contestations, and the intersectoral dynamics. We addressed issues of food, energy, and water nexus, double frontiers of mining and conservation, climate change vulnerabilities, the hegemony of fossil fuels, coal and climate change justice, carbon dioxide removal, and uneven geographies. We also discussed the social nature of oil extractivism, extraction frontiers and conflicts, and existences and extinctions related to monoculture plantations. We explored tea plantations as a form of agro-extractivism, extractivist forestries, entropy and ecological conflicts, value extraction and the role of finance, and mining and different forms of resistance to large-scale mining. In the track 2, there was discussion of indigenous alternative approaches to natural resources, diverse forms of resistance, and recreation of spaces for socio-environmental justice. The role of invisible and other than human agencies was discussed in the evaluation of environmental impacts of extractive projects, as well as well-being of different life forms, as pointed out in the Ecuadorian context. The invisible agency was also a central role of collective social memorizing, such as in Adivasi struggles against the informal mining of gold in India. Indigenous alternative approaches to extraction were also set light in the context of Russian communities practicing stone extraction, as well as in territorial ecology enacted by the Takana people of Bolivia. The resistance by indigenous societies was addressed in several papers, including non-violent feminist protest movements conducted by Ogoni women for the environmental justice in Niger. It was also addressed in partnerships established by scholars to support holders of indigenous and local knowledge that is critical for the safeguard of our planet's biological and cultural diversity. Then in track 5, the opening panel featured emphasis on women and their contribution to transformation. We had a presenter based in Rojava in Syria, and she outlined the transformative role of women's organizations in the Rojava revolution. There was also discussion of violence against women, environment and land defenders from data in the Environmental Justice Atlas, and the potential for bottom-up digitalization for local movements in agroforestry. The second session discussed alternatives to e-waste extractivism, forest dialogues and other alternatives to forest extractivism, and radical change in forest forestry land use practices and ownership models. The role of affective sociality was discussed from case studies of social movements in Kerala, India. The final panel discussed nuclear narratives in fiction and introduced the idea of transition from the Anthropocene to the Symbiocene. In track 6, there was an exciting mix of papers that explored extractivisms and alternatives from many different perspectives. One exciting view was the intersection of arts, extractivisms, and alternatives. The last session of the track was an original performance art piece made by Mirko Nikolic from Linköping University. The papers explored many different geographies, including the Gulf of Mexico, Western Mexico, Belarus, Brazil, Japan, the Arctic, the Southeastern Europe, and the realms of technology and thinking about the development of post-capitalist future. In all the tracks, there were diverse sets of presentations from different parts of the globe, presented by scholars of different academic backgrounds, which indicates that global extractivisms and transformation to alternatives is a multidisciplinary topic that can be approached from many different angles. Much future research is needed in the field of global extractivisms and transformations to alternatives, to understand how alternatives and extractivisms are interlinked, what the transformations entail, and what kind of futurings are brought into being through acts of resistance and reconstruction of the web of life. I just want to conclude here by saying that we will continue to work the different aspects of extractivisms and alternatives with a new kind of inspiration and enthusiasm gathered during these days of EXALT conference. Now it is time to publish and perform all these great ideas in the form of scientific articles, books, policy briefs, pamphlets, blogs, podcasts, artistic performances, etc. We will also soon inform you of our plans for the EXALT 2022 activities. I conclude here by quoting very touching words of Mirko Nikolic in his thought-provoking video. What kind of song shall we sing to unforget? Shall we share not to forget? Yesterday, today, tomorrow, struggle continues for fair conditions, for true information. Justice is woven with many hands, from mouth to mouth, neighbor to neighbor. Thank you so much and have a good evening, you all. I now give floor for Sophia.
Thank you so much, Anja, for that brilliant synthesis of these last exciting 3 days